an 18-year-old girl imagined 1,000, even 10,000 ways to confess to the boy she liked. But she never expected that when she finally gathered all her courage to stand in front of him, the first words out of her mouth would be, "That man that night, was it you?" She stayed quiet, afraid of losing her composure, trying hard not to think about what happened for years ago. Yet, those memories uncontrollably surface bit by bit in her mind. "If it weren't for that night I got drunk, do you think I would have touched you? To tell you the truth, I had no idea who I was touching at all." Her body started trembling slightly from the memories. She was scared that the people around her would notice her abnormality, so she clenched her fists tightly, her sharp nails digging into her palms, bringing sharp pain. "I had imagined countless times reuniting with him, but never like this. I thought I would never see this person again in my life." Just when she thought she might hurt her palms from clenching too hard, Hee-jiching spoke up. Even though he didn't call out a name, everyone in the room knew he was talking to Lin Yue. In another place, Ji Yi's tense emotions started to gradually relax. This dinner was finally coming to an end, and she could finally find an excuse to leave. Hee-jiching asked them to go karaoke, and hearing his words, Lin Yue nodded obediently. "Okay," Lin Yue thought for a moment. "By the way, Ji Yi sings really well, let's have her sing for you later." Brother He, who was reminded of Ji Yi by Lin Yue's sudden mention, shuddered slightly, his back stiffening uncontrollably. Because Hee-jiching was present, Ji Yi spoke lightly, "I'm not feeling well, I want to go back to school to rest, so I won't be going." Her eye subconsciously glanced at where Hee-jiching was sitting. "Ji Yi, what's wrong with you? And it's so late now, it's not safe to go back alone." Lin Yue's words of trying to keep her hadn't even finished when Hee-jiching, sitting beside her, stood up, completely ignoring the conversation between Ji Yi and Lin Yue. Hee-jiching was the first to stand up. Lin Yue glanced at Hee-jiching's back as he disappeared through the private room door, then looked at Ji Yi. Without saying anything more, she hurriedly followed him out. The people in the room also dispersed, leaving Ji Yi alone in the large room. Ji Yi's gaze fell on the chair where Hee-jiching had just been sitting. For her, those events from 4 years ago were deeply ingrained in her memory, unforgettable for a lifetime. But for him, it was just a drunken mistake. Over 4 years had passed, perhaps he had long forgotten those past dreams and forgotten the girl named Ji Yi. Ji Yi took a lot of effort to finally compose herself. As raindrops began to fall, she hurriedly ran towards the dormitory. Just before reaching the dormitory entrance, Ji Yi saw a familiar figure, Hee-jiching, standing there with an umbrella, talking to Lin Yue. Despite the increasingly heavy rain, Ji Yi stopped in her tracks and hid behind a street lamp. Because of the distance and the loud rain, Ji Yi couldn't hear what they were talking about, but she could see that they were having a good time. Lin Yue's smile grew brighter and brighter. Ji Yi's clothes were soaked through, and a cold wind made her shiver. Just as Ji Yi couldn't take it any longer, Lin Yue finally stepped onto the dormitory steps, and Hee-jiching turned around, looking like he was about to leave. Even though Hee-jiching's behavior during dinner suggested he didn't remember her, Ji Yi still didn't want to run into him, especially now that she was drenched and looked miserable. So, the moment Hee-jiching turned around, Ji Yi instinctively pressed her face against the street lamp pole. At first, Hee-jiching was far away, and Ji Yi dared to sneak a few glances at him to see where he was going. But as he got closer, Ji Yi was terrified of being discovered, so she didn't dare to move at all. After about 4 or 5 minutes, Ji Yi was sure enough time had passed for Hee-jiching to have walked far away. She breathed a sigh of relief and turned around, only to freeze in place. Hee-jiching was standing about 2 meters away from her. Hadn't he already left? It's been several minutes already, why is he still here? Hee-jiching seemed to notice someone was watching him and slightly turned his head to look in Ji Yi's direction. In her panic, she saw him looking her way. Without caring about anything else, she lifted her foot and ran towards the dormitory. In her haste, she didn't watch her step, slipped, and fell to the ground. Feeling the pain, Ji Yi's first reaction was to look back. Just as she thought, Hee-jiching, holding an umbrella, had heard the commotion and turned his head to look at her. How foolish she felt! He started to walk slowly towards her. Why did she always have to be so pathetic in front of him? He must think she's a joke. A gust of wind blew, making Ji-yi shiver. Heejichin, noticing this scene, slightly furrowed his brows. Realizing Heejichin wasn't looking away, Ji-yi quickly glanced at the place where he was standing, saw him staring at her arm, and instinctively moved her arm back. Heejichin withdrew his gaze from her, turned around indifferently, and walked away at a leisurely pace. Ji-yi watched his silhouette. Ji-yi, you're overthinking again. Back at the dormitory, Tang Hua exclaimed, Xiao Yi, why are you all wet and dirty? And your arm is injured too. Ji-yi shook her head, it's nothing, I just wasn't paying attention and accidentally fell. At the same time, Lin Yue was answering the phone, and the person on the other end asked, is everyone in your dorm there? Lin Yue turned her head and saw Ji-yi had returned, so she said, yes. Tang Hua said with concern, go clean up quickly. Xiao Yue's boyfriend brought milk tea, drink some to warm up after you wash up. Ji-yi forced a smile, I'll go clean up in the bathroom first. Closing the door, Ji-yi leaned against it and looked down. Heejichin was Xiao Yue's boyfriend. Meanwhile, the three outside continued chatting, all about Lin Yue's boyfriend. Xiao Yue, your boyfriend is so great. Right, you said you wanted milk tea, and after he dropped us off, he went to buy it for you. Even better, he has strong self-control, no matter how much people urged him to drink, he always said, drinking causes trouble. The others kept talking, but Ji-yi didn't listen to a word. All she could think about was drinking causes trouble. She remembered Heejichin's words from 4 years ago, looking down on her, if I hadn't been drunk that night, do you think I would have touched you? In that moment, it felt like something pierced the deepest part of Ji-yi's heart, hurting her so much that she wished she could disappear. The next day, Lin Yue's voice came from the dormitory, Xiao Yi, brother he went to high school at Sioux City High like you. Meanwhile, Heejichin, who had arranged with Lin Yue to attend an outdoor party tonight, came straight to the dorm. Just as Heejichin raised his hand to knock, he heard Lin Yue's voice from inside, Xiao Yi, did you know brother he back then? Heejichin paused his knocking. Inside, Ji-yi's voice was calm and steady, no, I didn't. Lin Yue sounded disappointed, I thought you might know brother he. I'm curious what he was like in high school. Ji-yi didn't respond. Oh, Xiao Yi, brother he called me a few days ago and said there's a big movie star outdoor party at Su Yuan tonight. Do you want to come? Ji-yi almost reflexively replied, no, I have other plans tonight. I wish I could never see Heejichin again in my life, there's no way I'd voluntarily go to a party he's attending. Before she could finish her thoughts, there was an orderly knock on the door. Lin Yue hurriedly stood up to open it. Seeing Heejichin at the door, she froze for a moment, then her face lit up with a smile. Brother he, why did you come up to get me? Heejichin didn't enter the dorm. Ji-yi quickly focused on her book, pretending to be engrossed and completely unaware of anyone arriving. Why did he come here? Heejichin's tone was indifferent. My phone died, so I came up. He glanced towards Ji-yi's seat and noticed an untouched milk tea in the trash can, its seal still intact. Lin Yue turned to Ji-yi, Xiao Yi, you really won't come with me? Before Lin Yue could finish, Heejichin's tone turned cold, not just anyone can attend tonight's party. Don't bring any random people. Ji-yi's fingers stiffened around her book. After speaking, Heejichin left without a moment's delay. Lin Yue stood there, bewildered. She could clearly sense the impatience in his voice. She bit her lip and softly said to Ji-yi, Xiao Yi, I'm sorry, before quickly leaving the dorm to chase after Heejichin. Ji-yi was left alone in the dorm, maintaining her previous posture, staring at the book for a long time. Ji-yi's excuse that she had other plans wasn't a lie. Her mother had called her to come home for dinner tonight. When she returned home, it was already dark. As she changed her shoes at the entrance, she noticed a pair of unfamiliar men's shoes. Mom, do we have guests today? Yes, someone you know. Ji-yi glanced towards the living room sofa, only seeing the back of someone's head. Who could it be? Before Ji Yi could figure it out, her father noticed her. Xiao Yi, look who's here. As her father spoke, He Jichen turned his head to look at her. Isn't he supposed to be at the outdoor party with Lin Yue? Can someone tell me why he's at our house? Ji Yi paused mid-step. Her father, thinking she was curious about why He Jichen was here, explained, your mom ran into Jichen the other day. Back when you were studying at Grandma Su's house, we troubled Aunt He quite a bit. Since I happened to be home today, I invited him over. Standing there dumbfounded, she didn't greet He Jichen. Her father, slightly reproachful, said, Xiao Yi, if I remember correctly, you and Jichen were classmates. How come you don't even say hello? Afraid her father would sense something was wrong between them, even though she was reluctant, she managed to calmly say, hello, long time no see, to He Jichen. He responded politely but distantly, long time no see. As if worried about further conversation with her, he quickly turned back to her father to continue the previous topic. After being apart for so many years, it was normal for us to be somewhat distant. Her father didn't mind and continued chatting with him. Feeling awkward, she excused herself to the kitchen to help her mom. If her father wasn't here, she doubted He Jichen would have said a word to her. At dinner, her mother seated her next to He Jichen. Sitting so close, she could occasionally catch his scent, which made her nervous. Her hand, holding the chopsticks, was unsteady, and she accidentally dropped some food on her skirt. She quickly stood up, I'll go wash this off. In the bathroom, she thought to herself, it's all in the past now, why make yourself uncomfortable? This meal feels like sitting on pins and needles. Maybe I should find an excuse to go back to school. She didn't want to stay at home for even a second longer. Lying to her mom, she said a friend needed her help and quickly escaped from the house. He Jichen watched her leave without much expression. When she reached outside, she realized she had left in such a hurry that she forgot her jacket and wallet. Since she left home to avoid He Jichen, she didn't want to go back, so she stood by the roadside and called for a cab on her phone. Focused on her phone, she didn't notice a car pulling up next to her. The car window rolled down, and the person inside looked at her. Just then, her mom called. She answered without hesitation. Xiao Yi, what happened with your friend? Her mom's tone relaxed after hearing it wasn't serious and changed the topic. Xiao Yi, what do you think of Jichen? A cold wind blew, and she sneezed heavily, not fully understanding her mom's question. She replied, What did you say? You had to take a break from school 3 years ago because of an incident. You're not young anymore, it's time to think about major life decisions. Without thinking, Ji Yi quickly responded, there's no way between me and him. His fingers trembled slightly as he was about to get out of the car, and he froze after hearing that. Why not? Her mom asked. When I was pregnant with you, auntie and I joked that if we had a boy and a girl, we'd have them marry. Feeling a headache coming on, she rubbed her temples. If He Jichen knew, he'd think I was shamelessly trying to marry him even after all the humiliation. Her tone grew sharper with urgency. Mom, I've told you before, it's impossible between me and him. I wouldn't consider him even if I considered anyone. As she emphasized her point on the phone, a car door slammed shut nearby. Startled, she looked over and saw a car she hadn't noticed before. She continued on the phone, Mom, I'm serious. I'll be with anyone but him. The car next to her suddenly roared to life and sped off, kicking up a gust of wind. She didn't know why, but that car seemed somewhat familiar. She hung up the phone and returned to the dorm, realizing her roommate hadn't come back yet. At that moment, the dorm's landline phone rang. She walked over and answered, Hello, who are you looking for? The person on the other end simply said, Hello. Memories came flooding back, her fingers tingling as she held the receiver. It was He Jichen. Why was he calling the dorm phone? He should know Lin Yue was at an event. Regaining her composure, she asked, Are you looking for Lin Yue? There was silence on the other end. After about a minute, she straightforwardly said, Lin Yue isn't here right now. I'll let her know to contact you when she returns. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now. Before she could finish her sentence, Hee-ji-chan cut the call, leaving her with a dial tone. Did he not want to speak because he realized it was her who answered? On Friday, she received a call from her high school classmate Lee Da. Because of her slight interest in Ming, Lee Da liked to occasionally treat her dorm mates to a meal. She thought it was just another meal invitation, but this time, Lee Da surprised them all by inviting the whole dorm to a hot spring. When they arrived at the agreed restaurant, Lin Ya, who was walking at the back, stared intently at her, remembering that night at the outdoor party when she told Lin Ya, Hee-ji-chan called the dorm looking for you. Hearing the two of them talking, Ming casually checked the call log on the landline. It was at 10 p.m. Wasn't he with us at that time? I was sitting right next to him. He definitely wasn't looking for me. There were only 4 people in the dorm, 3 of whom were at the party, leaving only Ji-yi alone. Even though she used a flawless excuse to dispel Ming's doubts that night. Lin Ya began to wonder what kind of relationship Ji-yi and Hee-ji-chan actually had. Ji-yi thought it would just be dinner with a few dorm mates and Lee Da. When they arrived and saw Hee-ji-chan, who was slightly turning his head to listen to Lee Da talk, Ji-yi suddenly regretted agreeing to Lee Da's invitation. Their eyes met. Lin Ya couldn't help but glance at Ji-yi with a somewhat cold look in her eyes. Compared to Ji-yi's regret, Tang Huahua was filled with surprise. Senior, he is here too? Just as Lee Da was about to introduce Hee-ji-chan to the girls, he was stunned. You guys know each other? Of course, we know him. Senior, he is our Xiao Ya's boyfriend. Without thinking, Tang Huahua spoke up. Before she could finish, Lin Ya, sitting next to her, quickly pulled Tang Huahua's arm to stop her from continuing and quickly added, Brother, he is my friend, so we all know him. As soon as they sat down, Lee Da started chatting with Lin Ya. In the midst of their conversation, Lee Da suddenly remembered that he and Hee-ji-chan usually only contacted each other by phone and didn't have each other's WeChat. So he turned his head and asked, Brother Chen, let's add each other on WeChat. Hee-ji-chan instinctively glanced at Ji-yi, who was sitting opposite and focused on her food. Hee-ji-chan paused, tapped his phone a couple of times, and handed it to Lee Da. Lee Da scanned it and then the other girls timidly asked, Senior He, can I add you on WeChat too? Hee-ji-chan nodded slightly. Seeing this, Tang Huahua and Ming also added Hee-ji-chan on WeChat. Only Ji-yi quietly sipped her tea. Noticing that everyone had added Hee-ji-chan except Ji-yi, Lee Da asked Ji-yi casually, Xiao Yi, aren't you going to add Brother Chen on WeChat to stay in touch? Ji-yi paused her tea-drinking motion, lowering her eyes to stare at the tea in her cup for a moment before raising her head and naturally lying, I forgot my phone. At that moment, she caught a glimpse of Hee-ji-chan's face out of the corner of her eye. Whether it was her imagination or not, she felt a cold, indescribable look in his eyes. Lee Da, being somewhat absent-minded, didn't think much of Ji-yi's excuse and switched to another topic he was curious about. Why do you call Brother Ji-chan Senior? If I remember correctly, Brother Ji-chan isn't from your university, right? Tang Huahua responded, Senior, he is indeed from our university. Ming added, Hee-ji-chan is studying in the directing department, which is different from our acting department. Ji-yi, who was about to continue drinking her tea, abruptly lifted her head upon hearing Ming's words. Wasn't Hee-ji-chan admitted to the top university, S-University, as the national top scorer? Why did he switch universities, she wondered. A boy who was a renowned academic star in Suzhou, entering the top university in the nation as the top scorer, why would he change his major? Lee Da, as if hearing some incredible news, exclaimed, Brother Ji-chen, what were you thinking? Giving up the top university and your family's business to study a completely unrelated major? Compared to Lee Da's excitement, Hee-ji-chan remained calm and leisurely sipped his tea, as if they weren't talking about him at all. Brother Ji-chen, are you crazy? When these words left Lee Da's mouth, Hee-ji-chan, who had been relaxed and composed, slightly trembled his eyebrows. Then he placed the teacup back on the table with a clink. His face showed no emotion, yet he gave off a sense of deep sorrow that seemed to seep out little by little. Yes, Hee-ji-chan, are you crazy to come here for her? You must be crazy. The next second, he slammed his hand on the table, stood up abruptly, kicked the chair behind him, and said, "I'll be right back," before turning around and leaving. Hee-ji-chun stormed out in anger, leaving everyone bewildered and creating an awkward atmosphere. They all exchanged looks and fell silent for quite a while. The first to snap out of it, Lee Da broke the silence. "What are we all staring blankly for? Let's eat something quickly." Just then, Ji-yi noticed her phone vibrating incessantly. She couldn't take the call here since she had previously lied about leaving it at the hotel. She discreetly picked up her phone and hurriedly stood up. "I've had too much tea, I need to use the restroom." At the same time, Lin Ye's gaze caught Ji-yi's hand under the table. Didn't she say she didn't bring her phone? Is she going to find Big Brother he? Ji-yi first went to wash her hands at the sink and then answered a call from her mother, which lasted less than a minute before she hung up. Coming out of the restroom, Ji-yi took a couple of steps forward before belatedly realizing there was someone standing not far from the trash can ahead. Instinctively, she looked up and saw Hee-ji-chun. He leaned against the wall with a cigarette between his fingers, a faint mist drifting around him. It's a small world indeed, Ji-yi thought as she stared straight ahead. Ignoring Hee-ji-chun completely, she continued walking forward. The hallway was unusually quiet, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing. As she was about to pass by Hee-ji-chun, Ji-yi silently breathed a sigh of relief. But before she could finish exhaling, Hee-ji-chun suddenly stubbed out his cigarette. As she watched him flick the butt into the trash can, Ji-yi hadn't even realized what was happening when Hee-ji-chun's hand that had held the cigarette grabbed her wrist. "I still owe you for what happened 4 years ago. Do you want me to help you remember?" he said. Ji-yi felt a jolt like an electric shock, causing her to shudder violently. She tried to free her wrist from his grip, but Hee-ji-chun seemed to anticipate her move. At the moment she exerted force, he tightened his grip even more. Frowning in confusion and panic, Ji-yi struggled, "Please let go of me." Before she could finish, Hee-ji-chun forcefully pushed her against the wall she had just leaned on. Memory hadn't even stabilized when Hee-ji-chun pinched her chin, lifting her stunning face into her view. "What do you want? What exactly do you want to do?" Her lips tightened, her stare at him fierce and stern. "Didn't I tell you to never appear in front of me again?" Perhaps due to recent frequent encounters with Hee-ji-chun, her immunity to memories had strengthened, not eliciting as strong a reaction as their first reunion. But now, as Hee-ji-chun launched into his barrage of words, memories she had forced herself not to dwell on from 4 years ago surged forth instantly. Ji-yi didn't want to show even a hint of emotion or lose composure in front of him. Hee-ji-chun interrupted whatever Ji-yi was about to say. "What you've done?" Ji-yi didn't know what he was going to say next, but she was certain it wouldn't be pleasant. She almost didn't hesitate before intercepting his words. "It truly is a coincidence," Ji-yi calmly raised her eyes to meet Hee-ji-chun's gaze. He looked at her and spoke in a tone as indifferent as ever, "If possible, I also hope you never appear in front of me again." Inside, Ji-yi screamed at herself, "You must not lose your composure like before. It was me who suffered humiliation and injustice 4 years ago." Hee-ji-chun's eyes turned fierce and sharp, as if he wanted to tear her apart. Ji-yi inwardly chuckled, though her tone remained unchanged. "Mr. He, rest assured, I absolutely won't become a nuisance to you. Please let me go so I can disappear from your sight as soon as possible." After saying this, Ji-yi added politely, "Thank you." Hee-ji-chun sneered, "Thank me? What do you have to thank me for? I should be thanking you for what happened 4 years ago. Do you want me to help you remember what you said?" The words from his mouth were unprecedentedly contemptuous and harsh. It felt like a sharp blade had pierced Ji-yi's heart, draining all color from her face in an instant. She bit her lip hard, using the pain to forcefully suppress her emotions. She really didn't want to look at him, but she didn't dare move. She was afraid that if she moved, the tears welling up in her eyes would start to fall. Hee-ji-chun seemed startled, suddenly releasing his grip on her and taking a step back before turning around and walking away. Ji-yi waited until Hee-ji-chun's footsteps had completely disappeared before she allowed herself to slump against the wall and slowly squat down, not caring about her appearance. Why does he always have to hurt me? Heejichin, when will you finally let me go? After dinner, everyone decided to go to the hot springs together. In the pool, Ming and Bohee were chatting animatedly, while Ji Yi sat on a lounge chair not far from the hot spring pool. At this moment, Lin Ya approached Ji Yi and whispered, "Xiao Yi, can you do me a favor?" Ji Yi turned to look at Lin Ya. "What's up?" "My period just started, and I'm afraid it'll stain my clothes." "Xiao Yi, could you go buy some sanitary pads for me?" Lin Ya's request was no big deal. Without much thought, Ji Yi stood up from the lounge chair. "Okay, I'll go now." Lin Ya's face lit up with a bright smile. "Thank you so much, Xiao Yi, sorry for the trouble." Ji Yi nodded and headed towards the changing room. "I'll go back to my room first. Could you deliver them to my hotel room later?" Ji Yi had only taken a few steps when Lin Ya suddenly seemed to remember something. "Oh, I almost forgot, I moved to room 1808. I'm not staying next door to you anymore." Ji Yi nodded, said nothing more, and headed straight to the changing room. Watching Ji Yi's disappearing figure, a calculating look flashed in Lin Ya's eyes. After buying the sanitary pads, Ji Yi returned to the hotel's lodge, took the elevator to the 18th floor, and found room 1808 as Lin Ya had mentioned. She knocked on the door and heard a familiar voice from inside. "The door isn't locked. Bring the stuff in." The voice stopped Ji Yi in her tracks. It was Heejichin. So this was Heejichin's room. That made sense, Heejichin was Lin Ya's boyfriend, after all. It was normal for them to be together at night. Ji Yi hurriedly collected her thoughts, opened the door with the shopping bag in hand, and quickly stepped inside. "I better drop these off and leave quickly." Just as she put the items down, a tall figure suddenly loomed over her. Ji Yi instinctively took a step back when she saw who it was. Trying to avoid any misunderstanding, she quickly said, "I'm here to see Lin Ya." Heejichin laughed, but his eyes were cold and chilling. "Nice excuse," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Now, this man looked down at her. "Do you think I'll let you stay just because you came up with this excuse to be in my room? This excuse is simply unreasonable." Without another word, Ji Yi moved to walk past Heejichin towards the door. Just as she pulled it open, the door was pushed open from the outside, and Lin Ya's voice rang out. "Brother He, are you here? We just ordered some snacks." She stopped mid-sentence, staring in surprise at Ji Yi and the man behind her. Tang Hua looked as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "Xiao Yi, what are you doing here?" she blurted out instinctively, but before she could finish, Ming, standing beside her, bumped her arm and gave her a knowing look. Ji Yi, without thinking, responded, "Lin Ya, weren't you supposed to be in the room?" As she spoke, Lin Ya turned to Heejichin, who was standing not far behind Ji Yi, and said, "Brother He, we just ordered some snacks and thought we'd see if you wanted some." Despite having calmed down somewhat, Heejichin's face still looked grim. Without lifting his gaze, he coldly replied, "No, thank you." Lin Ya, not waiting for Heejichin's response, gently looked at He. "Brother He, if you get hungry later, just let me know." Acting as if she had no idea why Ji Yi was in the room, Lin Ya's tone carried hints of innocence and surprise. She asked, "Xiao Yi, why are you here so late in Brother He's room? Shouldn't you know best why I'm here?" Ji Yi furrowed her brow slightly, seemingly starting to understand something. Everyone was from the same dorm, and Tang Hua didn't want things to get too awkward, so she quickly tried to smooth things over. "If I remember correctly, Xiao Yi and Senior He both went to Sucheng First High School. They might have known each other for a long time." Ming immediately nodded in agreement. That's right, Lin Ya chimed in with a forced smile. "But Xiao Yi told me before that she wasn't study at the same school as Brother He. So it turns out you've been planning to frame me for seducing my best friend's boyfriend all along, huh? Lin Ya, you really don't know why I'm here?" Ji Yi questioned, her voice calm. Lin Ya obviously intended to play dumb to the end, her face filled with confusion. "Xiao Yi, What do you mean by that? How would I know why you're here? Didn't you tell me your period just started and asked me to buy sanitary pads for you, and then said you moved to room 1808 and asked me to bring them here? Ji pointed to the cabinet by the door where the pads were placed as evidence. Tang Huahua turned to Lin Ya, asking, Lin Ya, is what Xiao Yi just said true? Lin Ya didn't respond to Tang Huahua. Instead, she looked aggrieved, her eyes turning red. Xiao Yi, why are you doing this? I never asked you to buy anything for me. I've been soaking in the hot spring all night. If I were really on my period, how could I be in the hot spring? Lin Ya said, her voice trembling, as if she suddenly figured something out. Xiao Yi, did you want to see Brother He and use me as an excuse? Ji Yi watched this scene and fully understood that Lin Ya had come prepared. Lin Ya could come up with such a flawless plan, proving she wasn't simple. Her eyes filled with tears. Everyone said that for years ago, when Ji Yi first joined the entertainment industry, she became famous in her first year. If it weren't for the accident 3 years ago that put her in a coma, she would have been the top star in the industry by now. I really didn't know that from the beginning she saw me as her imaginary enemy. Xiao Yi, I never thought you would use me as a cover to get close to Brother He and ruin my good intentions towards you. I thought it was just a misunderstanding. Seeing this, Tang Huahua couldn't stand it anymore and suggested, Xiao Yi, why don't you apologize? We still have to live under the same roof after all. Even though I explained to everyone, no one believed me. Heejichin, who had been watching everything unfold without saying a word, finally spoke up, Xiao Yi, is what Lin Ya said true? Ji Yi laughed mockingly as she stood by the door, her back to Lin Ya. Lin Ya, doesn't your face hurt when you say such things? At this point, Lin Ya started crying even more, trembling as if scared by Ji Yi. Xiao Yi, even now you won't admit that you framed me, and instead you turn around and accuse me. Ji Yi didn't respond, but instead took off the waterproof watch on her wrist. I truly considered you a friend, even though I just found out you were using me. She quickly pressed several buttons on the watch, and suddenly a voice recording played, Xiao Yi, could you go buy some sanitary pads for me? Oh, I almost forgot, I moved to room 1808. Lin Ya instantly panicked, looking like a thief caught in the act. The recording continued, and Lin Ya, as if electrocuted, lunged at Ji Yi with claws outstretched. Stop it, don't play it anymore. She realized Ji Yi had prepared for this. Exposed, Lin Ya's first reaction wasn't to apologize, but to throw her bag at Ji Yi's face. Ji Yi didn't expect this sudden move and couldn't dodge in time. Just as the bag was about to hit her, a strong hand grabbed Ji Yi's arm, pulling her back and shielding Ji Yi. The bag hit the door with a loud bang. Heejichin's cold, stern gaze was chilling, shouting at Lin Ya. Ji Yi took a few seconds to calm down, then looked up at the man in front of her. Without thinking about why Heejichin did what he did, she instinctively pushed his chest away and stepped back, her gaze coldly fixed on Lin Ya. I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. I've always believed in not attacking unless provoked. Since you messed with me, don't blame me for not holding back. Lin Ya's face turned pale with fear as Ji Yi slowly approached her, speaking with the authority of a queen. Since you know that Ji Yi, who rose to fame within my first year at Beiying, is not an easy person to deal with, I advise you to stay away from me. Without waiting for a response, Ji Yi turned and left, not stopping until she disappeared from sight. Tang Huahua and Bo He finally snapped out of their daze, exchanged glances, and each found an excuse to leave, one after the other. Now, only Lin Ya and Heejichin were left in the suite. Lin Ya hung her head, too afraid to look at Heejichin. How did things end up like this? She remembered the first time she met him was in the cafeteria. That day, she deliberately sat next to Heejichin. When she called out to Ji Yi, Heejichin glanced at her, and he stood next to her and asked, "Excuse me, do you know what time it is?" "My phone died." It felt like winning the lottery in that moment. She tried to suppress her excitement and exchanged phone numbers with him, pretending to be aloof. When he approached her willingly, she was almost overjoyed. But she had no idea at the time that he was only getting close to her because of Ji Yi. Every time he asked her out, it was always under the pretense of her dorm room. At first, she didn't think much of it until one night when Ji Yi said he called the dorm phone looking for her. That's when she started to suspect that he was really trying to find Ji Yi. She couldn't stand being used as a pawn for Ji Yi. How could she willingly accept that? How could she be content? Thinking of this, Lin Ya's fingertips trembled slightly. She cautiously looked up at Heejichin, who was bending down to pick up her bag. For a brief moment, a glimmer of hope appeared in Lin Ya's heart. Is he forgiving me by doing this? Brother He? Lin Ya started to speak, but before she could finish, Heejichin straightened up and hurled the bag at her face. The sharp pain that followed struck Lin Ya's heart, plunging her back into despair. He wasn't helping her pick up the bag, he was treating her the same way she treated Ji Yi. Tears immediately welled up in Lin Ya's eyes. She looked up at Heejichin, choking out, "Brother He." Heejichin's eyes blazed with uncontrollable anger as he coldly spat out a single word, "Leave." A few days later, Bo He and Tang Huahua chatted together. Ji Yi and Lin Ya hadn't been staying in the dorm. "I heard she moved out and now commutes in an Audi," Bo He said. Tang Huahua replied, "Senior, he drives an Audi. Could Lin Ya have moved in with him? If that's true, it's quite shocking." Just then, the dorm door opened, and Ji Yi, who hadn't been seen for days, walked in dragging a suitcase. Bo He and Tang Huahua fell silent. The women knew their dorm mates' idle chatter was often mixed with truth and falsehoods. But when Ji Yi went to do laundry with a pile of clothes, she saw Lin Ya and Heejichin together, confirming the gossip was true. Was Heejichin here to pick her up? The two stood face to face, talking about something. Heejichin leaned against the car, head slightly bowed, playing with his car keys. It was just as the dorm mates described, a luxury Audi. Ji Yi took her eyes off them, but just as she was halfway through looking away, Heejichin suddenly raised his head and looked directly in her direction. As he saw Ji Yi, he felt an inexplicable pang of anxiety in his heart. Without thinking, he took a step towards her, but before he could move further, the woman turned to leave. Meanwhile, Ji Yi, noticing Heejichin looking like he was about to walk over, instinctively turned and left. He watched Ji Yi's retreating figure for a moment, then Lin Ya called out to him in confusion. At that instant, Heejichin's mood plummeted to the worst. Inside the laundry room, Ji Yi pressed her widely beating heart with her right hand, unable to suppress a smile. I must have been seeing things. There's no way Heejichin would walk towards me. Lin Ya, who had coincidentally run into Heejichin, was still thinking of apologizing for what happened that day. But Heejichin ignored her, turned, and walked straight back to his car. He slammed the door shut, ignoring Lin Ya's hand banging on the window, floored the gas pedal, and sped away, leaving her behind. Just then, his WeChat beeped with a voice message from his friend Hanji. "Weren't you supposed to wait for me at the school gate? Why is there no one here?" Heejichin replied simply, "Go to Jinbi Hua Huang." He frowned at his phone, thinking, "You really are something." When he arrived at the private room, Hanshi, noticing Heejichin's foul mood, pulled out a cigarette and offered it to him. Heejichin took it without a word. Hanji lit the cigarette for Heejichin, expecting him to hold it in his fingers like before and let it burn out. To his surprise, Heejichin took a deep drag and Hanji asked, "Are you in a bad mood because staying at Being isn't comfortable?" Hanji had more to say about Being. "You got a combined degree from the top school, and yet you came to Being? Even if you were tired of studying, you could have gone home to take over your family's business. I can't understand why you insist on starting from scratch." He continued speaking as if he'd suddenly realized something. "Honestly, did you come to Being because of some hidden reason? I've known you for 4 years in college, and I've never heard you express any interest in directing. So don't give me that following my dreams nonsense. Is it because of someone?" Heejichin stiffened for a moment and coughed heavily. Hanji looked at him like a detective who had hit the mark. "Look at you getting all worked up. Did I guess right? Is it a man or a woman?" Is it someone here at Being? Hee-ji-chan, who had been silent all night, suddenly stood up. Before Hanji could finish speaking, Hee-ji-chan had already left. Looks like he really hit a nerve, Hanji thought. Sitting in his car, Hee-ji-chan recalled the words from that day, "If possible, I hope you never appear in front of me again. So, Mr. He, please rest assured, I will never be a bother to you. Please just let me go so I can disappear from your sight as quickly as possible." The light outside the car window flickered on and off, casting shadows on his handsome face. He stared straight ahead, her expression calm. As she approached Chua Yuin Road, he suddenly hit the brakes. Under the dim streetlight, a girl was curled up on a bench, head down. He couldn't see the girl's face, but he recognized her instantly. What happened to her? She buried her head in her knees. A mysterious pain in her abdomen caused beads of sweat to form on her face. "I was fine just a moment ago. Is my old illness acting up again?" She began to tremble from the pain. The woman clearly felt her consciousness starting to fade. She struggled to stay awake, but the pain in her abdomen grew sharper, and her back was soaked with sweat. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, she vaguely saw someone anxiously running toward her. Then she heard a familiar voice. "Shui, wake up!" She thought she was hallucinating and froze for a moment. Was that Hee-ji-chan? Why did he sound so worried? "Shui," the familiar voice echoed in her ear again. It must be the pain-causing hallucinations, she thought. Otherwise, why would he look so anxious and hold me so carefully, as if he were really worried about me? When she came to, she was no longer on the cold, dark road, but in a warm, soft bed. She lay there, slowly opening her eyes. It took her a moment to realize that the ceiling above her was unfamiliar. Where am I? I remember feeling intense stomach pain on my way back to school yesterday, and then I blacked out. She looked around and found herself in a completely unfamiliar environment. Suddenly, she saw rows of neatly hung men's clothes in the closet. She abruptly sat up, lifting the blanket with her hands. So, the person who brought me home last night was Hee-ji-chan. Before she could fully process this thought, the bedroom door opened. Instinctively, she turned towards the sound and saw Hee-ji-chan standing at the door in loungewear. She froze, staring at him as her mind slowly started to work. Were those hallucinations before I passed out actually real? As the man approached step by step, she became increasingly uneasy, her fingers instinctively gripping the sheet. Just as her thoughts began to spiral, she heard more footsteps entering the room, followed by Aunt Jong's respectful voice addressing Hee-ji-chan. "Mr. He, the porridge is ready. Should we let the young lady eat now?" Hee-ji-chan didn't respond immediately. He stared at her fingers clutching the sheet for a moment before nodding to Aunt Jong, giving her permission. Aunt Jong then walked to the bedside, stirring the steaming porridge while speaking to her. "Miss, Dr. Zhu came last night and said you had acute gastroenteritis. He gave you an 4 drip." Following Aunt Jong's words, she glanced at her left hand and saw the needle mark on the back of it. "So, the intense pain I felt last night was due to acute gastroenteritis. Dr. Zhu suggested that you eat light meals for the next few days. You should eat something now, and later you'll need to take some medicine." As Aunt Jong spoke, she brought a spoonful of porridge to Ji Yi's lips. Ji Yi stared at the soft, glutinous white porridge without drinking it. Instead, she looked up at Hee-ji-chan, who was standing nearby. "Thank you for last night." Hearing the woman's polite tone, Hee-ji-chan was momentarily taken aback, and as Ji Yi finished speaking, she lifted the blanket, looking as though she was about to get out of bed. Aunt Jong hurriedly spoke up. "Miss, you've been asleep for so long. You should eat something first to regain your strength before getting up." Ji Yi replied to Aunt Jong, "I'm fine." Hee-ji-chan, who hadn't spoken a word since entering the room, suddenly spoke up. "It's okay, Aunt Jong. You can go about your work." As Aunt Jong stood up, Hee-ji-chan took the porridge from her. The man looked at Ji Yi, who had her head lowered, and his brow furrowed slightly. "Why don't you like the porridge?" Sitting on the bed, Ji Yi didn't respond and simply shook her head. Suddenly, she looked up and said something completely unrelated. Mr. He, could you please tell me how much the medical expenses were last night? Also, I'm really sorry for troubling you. As Ji Yi's words fell, the man's expression turned cold, and the atmosphere in the room became tense. Knowing that the woman he liked had misunderstood him, He Jichen found himself unable to explain. His eyes were deep and calm. I'll have Aunt John write down the instructions for the medicine. Take them with you and follow them. Ji Yi felt something was off. She glanced at him, thinking that He Jichen rarely showed such patience. Why was he being so insistent? Could it be? A thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Was he trying to apologize on behalf of Lin Yue? With this in mind, she decided to be straightforward. You don't need to do all this for me. I know you're only treating me this way because you're apologizing for what Lin Yue did to me at the hot spring resort. Don't worry, I won't do anything to her, especially since you saved me last night. The man's expression turned cold, and the atmosphere in the room became oppressive. I'll pretend that incident never happened. As she spoke, her quickly took out all the cash from her bag. This money should be enough to cover last night's medical expenses. She then placed the money on the bed. Ji Yi recalled that Lin Yue probably had other matters to attend to last night and didn't stay at He Jichen's place. She thought she should leave quickly in case Lin Yue returned and caused unnecessary misunderstandings and trouble. So, she politely said goodbye to He Jichen. I'll leave now to avoid any misunderstandings when Lin Yue comes back. She hadn't finished saying the word misunderstandings when He Jichen suddenly took a step forward. Before Ji Yi could open the door, she heard a bang and felt a big hand grab her shoulder. In an instant, she was pinned against the door. Her chest heaved as she struggled to speak. Are you that eager to set me up with Lin Yue? Let me tell you. He Jichen suddenly realized what he almost blurted out and stopped himself, pressing his lips together tightly. The words of Lin Yue and I have nothing to do with each other stuck in his throat and wouldn't come out. The man's intense and chilling aura made Ji Yi freeze in place, terrified by his sudden action. Why was he so angry? He Jichen opened his mouth several times but couldn't find a better explanation. But no matter what he did, she would always associate him with Lin Yue, even imagining Lin Yue staying at his place. The more He Jichen thought about it, the angrier he got, and his grip tightened. Ji Yi suddenly cried out in pain. Only then did He Jichen release her wrist, noticing the red marks he'd left from holding on too tightly. He instinctively reached out to touch her wrist, but then quickly pulled back. Feeling a bit guilty, He Jichen said, "You're still sick. Have some porridge to settle your stomach, and I'll take you home later." He wanted to explain his relationship with Lin Yue, but Ji Yi cut him off, saying she didn't care. Whatever you and Lin Yue have going on is none of my business. You've already helped me enough, you don't need to take me home. Without looking back, she walked away. Her calm and indifferent demeanor only fueled He Jichen's anger further. Watching her disappear at the bedroom door, his emotions spiraled out of control. He Jichen sat expressionlessly for a while, feeling frustrated. Was I mute? Why couldn't I make myself clear? Meanwhile, sitting in the taxi, Ji Yi was confused. He was supposed to keep his distance from me, yet he saved me. Maybe he just couldn't ignore the situation at that moment. All I ever wanted was to keep it in a place where I could always see it. I never hoped to possess it. Until that night 4 years ago. Ji Yi returned to the dormitory and took her medicine before falling asleep. When she woke up, it was already dark outside. As Ji Yi got out of bed, Tang Huahua noticed she was awake, took off her left earphone, and said, "Xiao Yi, you're awake." Ji Yi responded with a pause. "Why is there a lunchbox on my desk? I guessed you might be hungry since you've been sleeping since you got back. I thought the cafeteria might be closed by the time you woke up, so I brought you some food." Judging by the dishes, it was from the first cafeteria, but the taste was different, much better than usual. Feeling puzzled, Ji Yi couldn't help but ask Tang Huahua, "Is this really from the first cafeteria? Why does it taste different from what I usually eat?" Tang Huahua's eyes flickered for a moment. "Maybe you were just too hungry and it's messing with your perception." Tang Huahua suddenly sat down beside Ji Yi and began speaking seriously. Xiao Yi, do you know what I heard this afternoon? Something unbelievable. Ji Yi glanced at Tang Huahua. What is it? It's about Lin Yue. I just found out her boyfriend isn't Heejichin. When Ji Yi heard those words, she thought about what had happened that morning at Heejichin's place. Her fingertips trembled as she held the spoon, her eyes cast down. She remained silent, but Tang Huahua continued to share her shocking news. Her boyfriend is actually that playboy from our drama department, Yang Shaw. I always felt there was something strange about her and Heejichin. As she was speaking, it suddenly seemed like she realized something. Then she opened her mouth in sudden understanding. No wonder there was that one time when I mentioned that brother, he was Lin Yue's boyfriend, and Lin Yue slapped me. I didn't get it then, but now I think about it, Lin Yue was just deluding herself into believing she was brother his girlfriend. So Lin Yue and Heejichin never had any relationship to begin with. But whether they had a relationship or not doesn't really matter to me. Meanwhile, Auntie Zhong appeared at the study door for the 5th time. Heejichin still stood motionless by the floor-to-ceiling window. Mr. He, since Miss left, you've been standing here. Would you like to eat something? As before, silence was the only response Auntie Zhong received. As Auntie Zhong was leaving, Heejichin's phone beeped several times. Reflexively, he lifted it to his eyes. Heejichin stared at the messages from Tang Huahua. Senior He, Xiao Yi went to the hospital. The doctor said she's fine now. She returned to the dorm and slept. When she woke up, she ate the meal you sent. I also told her everything you wanted about Lin Yue. Xiao Yi just took her medicine, had a bath, watched some TV, and fell asleep again. The phone beeped again. It was another message from Tang Huahua. Brother He, why are you so nice to Xiao Yi? Heejichin stared at those words for a long time before blinking slowly. Recently, these 3 words seemed to be the ones he heard the most. Not long ago, he met Li Da at a hot spring resort. After knowing he had gone into the film industry, Li Da asked him, why are you doing this? Yesterday at the Beijing Grand Hotel, Han Zhifan also asked, I don't understand, why would you give up such a bright future to start from scratch?